Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. They offer free checking with industry-leading mobile banking. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. Happy Thursday morning, Hokie Nation. We got ourselves a 2024 football schedule. Football Crew is on deck today to talk all about it. It's episode 343 of the Tech Sideline Podcast, and it starts right now. We record on Thursday, January 25th, 2024, from the high-tech studios at the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Remember to like, subscribe, and refer the show to a friend, and head over to techsideline.com to check out our extensive editorial content. As always, the first month of subscriptions is free. I'm your host, Giovanni Heater. To my right, lead analyst and columnist Chris Coleman. Across the way, our senior staff writer, Andy Bitter. Behind the scenes producing today, the mustache man himself, as always, Mr. Nick Brown. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. And guys, we got ourselves a 2024 football schedule. It took us, a couple chunks throughout the week to get there, and then finally the big drop on Wednesday evening. Exciting stuff. We'll start with Chris. Give me one immediate initial reaction.
Immediate initial reaction is, I don't know, I think it's difficult to put together a schedule that everybody likes, that is fair to everyone when you have 16 teams in a league and 2 of your teams are all the way on the West Coast. I look at Tech's schedule and the names on it, and it's manageable, but there are a couple stretches on there that I'm not a big fan of.
Andy, what you got? Initial reaction here.
Yeah, I think Chris used the word manageable. I look at the schedule, and I think when I'm making predictions for a season, I may be a little more bearish on things than Virginia Tech fans. You see it and go 12-0, automatic, 12-0, 15-0 with the playoff included. And I look at it, I go, 9 wins is very possible.
Yeah.
Manageable non-conference schedule. No huge landmines in the conference. Clemson, the marquee game. Miami on the road as well. But man, if this team progresses like you hope it does in the offseason, I look at the schedule and I go, 9-3 is very possible. 9-3 puts you in the mix in the ACC. 10-2, if you could do a little bit better, maybe you could have special things during the season. So I look at it and I think it sets up pretty well for them this year.
Yeah, we've talked about it. This team continues to replenish, reload, but also keep everything that they had in the chamber as well. So let's go ahead and read through the schedule here. Nick's going to pop up a graphic for us here. And, we start August 31st on the road in Nashville at Vanderbilt. I would just like to add, I'm extra hyped for this. I turned 21 on August 31st, 2024. We'll be in Nashville, so that's a great place to do that.
Jake Lyman can take you out and show you where everything there is to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It actually would be better if you turn it on August 30th in Nashville.
That's true.
31st would be the day of the game, so you got to.
Well, but yeah.
Let's just hope it's a nooner, so you've got the rest of the whole night.
Yes, my dad was texting me yesterday. My parents want to come down. My uncles are going to come down, so it'll be a good time.
Do you think the Nashville VAR should be forgiving enough to be like, your turn, come on, at midnight I'm going to be old enough to drink here, let me in here? I think they can.
We can't go out and get crazy though the night before a big game. We got to save it for post game.
No, you can get crazy the night before.
That's spoken from
you're still young enough to pull that off.
Yeah,
future Hall of Famer.
You can play hurt the next day. You gotta, if you're going to be in this business, you're going to have to learn how to manage that whole thing.
All right, fair. That and how to douse down the clam chowder when in Boston.
Yes. Well, listen, one of my early trips to Miami, trust me, the next day in the press box was not the most pleasant experience after the night before. Sometimes you just got to power through it.
I can't believe we're talking about
I'm just saying, I'm putting that out there.
I'm looking forward to it. Stuff. I did start it. Will you be joining us? Will we see you in Nashville, Andy? Will we bump into you?
Oh, absolutely.
Wonderful.
Nashville's a great town. I haven't been there in a while. UVA played at Middle Tennessee for some reason. in like 2005 or something like that, 2007. I can't remember the exact year. And that's basically a trip to Nashville. So had a great time in Nashville, Broadway down there.
There we go.
It's a fantastic time. So this is a good trip, even though I wish they were playing this in the Titan Stadium and not the Vandy Stadium that they're redoing right now.
That was the original game plan. They announced, last year that they were going to switch that?
I think when they signed the contract, it was open to possibly being in either stadium.
Okay.
And, I've seen Vanderbilt, like last year they played without an end zone seating because they had knocked the whole thing down. So we'll see how quickly they can construct that whole thing. But I've been to Vanderbilt Stadium once before, and it was nothing to write home about. So I was kind of disappointed. We'll see if once they redo it, how much nicer it'll be. But I do kind of wish that was in the Titan Stadium.
Well, I will buy Andy his first beer on August 31st down in Nashville. September 7th, home game. Virginia Tech opens the home slate against Marshall. Kind of a revenge game for the Hokies. Thoughts on the Thundering Herd briefly?
Good running game, obviously. They fired their offensive coaching staff, as they should. I mean, just what they did against Virginia Tech last year, I was not impressed with. When you've got, they didn't have a good passing game at all, but they had an elite running back, and they were just out there pass happy against the Hokies for some reason. So that'll be a different team because I think their quarterback entered the portal too.
New quarterback, and Rashid Ali went pro. So
that'll be a totally different looking team. But I think Virginia Tech should have won that game this past year, and I think they would have won it after the offensive changeover.
Right.
But yeah, in lane, I don't. Virginia Tech would have to screw that up.
Yeah,
I think they'll be a significant favorite in that game, and like you said, the revenge factor is there. They were embarrassed last year to lose that game, a game they probably should have won. I have to imagine they're plenty motivated to win this one.
Next up, September 14th, another road game. ODU. If it's up to Tech fans, I think let's let this be the last and final time.
What could
in a
go
while.
wrong in Norfolk that hasn't gone wrong already? This is one where you've got to get that monkey off your back. Like, it should be a game they should win. The last two were games they should have won when they went down there too, and stuff happened, and weird stuff happened in both of those games. So this is something they'll have to navigate.
Now, it was before I was here, so forgive me, but what time of the season was that first loss played? Because I think last year, if it's not the season opener, or what was it, 2 years back, if it's not the season opener, you might not have the same hiccups.
It was late September.
It was week 4. It was supposed to be the fourth game, but the ECU game got canceled the previous week because of a hurricane that came through, and Tech was riding high. They had beaten Florida State on the road. Everybody thought that was a great win. It turned out Willie Taggart had no idea what he was doing down there. They hammered William and Mary. They had this weird off week early in the season, and then all their flaws were exposed at ODU in a game that sort of foreshadowed the rest of the season.
Well, there you go. Hoping to beat the Monarchs this time around September 14th. It'll be a return game for Ollie Jennings. He gets to play at ODU, which will be fun. September 21st, back inside Lane Stadium. Again, the Hokies kind of get to go on a little bit of a revenge tour throughout the non-conference. They'll play Rutgers inside Lane on the 21st.
It's going to be one of their most physical opponents of the year. Rutgers managed to win 2 games this past year in which they didn't throw for 50 yards, one of which was against Virginia Tech. They also won another game in the bowl game against Miami where they didn't throw for 100 yards. So this is a team that is very much used to winning with running and defense. You got to be a physical team to be able to do that. So this is when you're getting into the area of the schedule that concerns me. Tech will play one of their most physical opponents of the year, and then 6 days later you're at Miami. I don't like that. And then your next trip is all the way to the West Coast.
Yeah.
Against Stanford. I don't like that coming off that Rutgers game. I don't like that the Stanford game is after the Miami game, 2 long flights in a row. Yep. And I know you get an extra day because the Miami game's on Friday. You get an extra day before the Stanford game. Travel to Miami is not something that has always been flawless. Like the 2017 team, they had to fly, when they flew back after that game, had to fly into Johnson City, Tennessee, and bus back to Blacksburg. So they had to cancel all team activities the next day on Sunday, which made the Georgia Tech game a short week. The next week, you're talking about that's prime hurricane season in Florida, so you don't know how that can impact your travel schedule and things like that. So for me, I don't like that 3-game stretch right there at all. I just think there's a built-in loss there somewhere just due to all those factors I just mentioned.
Yeah, Rutgers is interesting. Kyle Monangai back for them. They brought in the transfer from Minnesota at quarterback. I think Wimsatt is still there, but that'll be a competition there. So we'll see if they have a little more offensive punch than they had this year. But like you said, that's a tough defensive-minded team. Not a gimme, but I think it's a game that Virginia Tech should be favored in going into the season. I mean, I look at this non-conference schedule and I go, if there's anything less than 4-0 would be a disappointment.
Yeah, I also agree with Chris here. It is really tough in a span of 8 days. I get the extra day to go Miami to Stanford. Not easy stuff there. After that, though, you do get the bye week. And then on the 17th, back inside Lane Stadium, back-to-back home games. And coming off the bye week is when you get your Thursday game. That just makes sense. Boston College and Georgia Tech. BC is going to be on a Thursday night inside Lane, and then Georgia Tech is at home on a Saturday.
BC should be a win. Georgia Tech, I guess in theory, should be. Tech will be favored for sure. But back after the season, I was sitting there. I did a Friday Q&A, and I was talking about, is there a better or a more productive quarterback running back combo in the ACC than Drones and Tootin? So I was looking at all the numbers, and technically, yeah, there is.
Haynes King had a really good year.
That dude can run the ball, and their running back. Oh, his last name is Haynes. So they have two Haynes in the backfield there. He was a 1,000-yard rusher this past season. So they have their own 1-2 punch that is very, very similar to Virginia Tech in terms of production. So that's going to be a game where I would expect a lot of running. Wouldn't expect that to be a long game, but it should be a pretty physical game. Both teams come into that game knowing their identity. So that is like an underrated game on the schedule. I think it should be one of the more entertaining games of the season. I think both those teams are pretty well coached too. I think what we've seen at Georgia Tech. I think we've also saw how bad Jeff Collins was. The fact that Brent Pry was able to hit the ground running. He started winning immediately, and Collins could never win.
Apparently, they switched their special teams scheme mid-season. It was so bad.
Oh yeah,
under Collins, and they paid immediate dividends with that. If I were to tell you, how many touchdowns do you think Haynes King accounted for last season?
Since you're saying that,
31.
I'm gonna guess 42.
37.
Right in the middle.
27 passing touchdowns, 10 rushing. He also had 16 interceptions.
I was about to say, yeah.
So he's one of those giveth and taketh away quarterbacks. But I mean,
Josh Allen style.
Yeah, Georgia Tech is such a strange team because they were incredible against really good teams last year, and then they would just lay the weirdest eggs. Didn't they lose to Bowling Green last year and Scott Lafleur? Handily. It wasn't close. They lost by quite a few, I think double digits in that game. So that's a game where I don't quite know what to expect from the other team. And, we've seen over the years Georgia Tech has come in here and played very well. Those were option teams, but still coming in and playing very well in Blacksburg. So that's certainly not a gimme by any means.
I'm marking that one on my calendar. It's a low profile game relative to some of the others, but that's the game that's has the potential when you look back and say, wow, that was one of the most entertaining games of the year, because you've got two really good quarterbacks and two really good running backs. And one of the quarterbacks has a tendency to turn the ball over. So that game just sounds like it's going to have a lot of big plays in it.
Were you referring to Kyron Drones? Or no, he fumbles a lot. But
that's true. That's true.
Doesn't always lose those fumbles.
That's true.
But, there has been a fumbling issue.
Yeah. Really glad that one's in Lane and you don't have to go play that one in Bobby Dodd down in Atlanta. Certainly helps your chances a little bit. November 2nd, the following week, Tech's going to head on the road up I-81 and play on the road at Syracuse.
You just had to work Syracuse into this podcast.
Crucify me in the comments, please. I almost wore a Syracuse hat on set. No, just kidding. But thoughts on the orange in this one?
Trap game. If there's, this is just underline it, circle it, put stars around it. Trap game. I know Syracuse isn't much. They have a new coach coming in, new quarterback that I don't know if he's going to do as well without Ohio State talent around him. No offense, Gio.
I'm taken.
But man, bad things happen when they go up to the former Carrier Dome. I refuse to call it by its new name. It's the Carrier Dome. When I was doing research for the article on this, I noticed that 5 times ranked Virginia Tech teams have gone up there and lost to unranked Syracuse teams. So people say, oh, it's history and these are different teams and this is new coaching staff. 5 times Virginia Tech's gone up there, and as you should have been expected to win as a ranked team against an unranked team, and ended up walking away with a loss. The only team that broke that streak in the last 30 years had Michael Vick at quarterback. So, you can say, Syracuse, new coach, that you're not going to expect much from the Orange this year. I'm saying, be careful on that one. That plays even more into the idea that this is a trap game, because you got Clemson the following week at home. Everybody's going to be looking forward to that game. We just talked about Georgia Tech. If you win that one, you're probably feeling pretty good about yourself. You got this trip to Syracuse in the middle of it that people won't be thinking about too much, that I think could be a difficult game that pops up there.
And last time Tech played inside the Dome, it was Dino Baber's first year, also Fuente's first year, ranked Tech team. Unranked Syracuse team, first year head coach.
And Syracuse took it to them that game.
I've got some numbers for you. So that 2016 game, the previous 3 games, Tech had beaten Boston College, East Carolina, and UNC by a combined score of 137-20.
Yeah, they were crushing.
2 of those 3 teams went to bowl games, and then Tech goes to the Carrier Dome and just what was that?
Yeah,
they played horrible.
They were asleep. It felt
there was a 10-win Tech team that played for the ACC title against a bad 4-8 Syracuse team. 2002, their previous trip to the Carrier Dome. Again, a 10-win Virginia Tech team against a 4-win Syracuse team. Brian Randall broke the Big East record for passing yards with 503. Ernest Wilford broke the Big East record for receiving yards with 279. What happened? Tech somehow lost that game.
Was that 50-42?
50-42, triple overtime against a bad Syracuse team. Bad. Even when Tech had Vic, they barely won that game.
It was close. It was a tight game.
It had this Superman run at the end of the game. Dwight Freeney had 4 sacks in that game.
Yeah. You didn't even bring up 98, the last second touchdown pass.
Exactly.
The throwback from McNabb.
I put all this in my article today, so if you'd like to relive all those wonderful memories, you can go read it.
And again, a lot of this stuff is some of that is before these players were born. So it's like exactly right. You sit there and you say, this doesn't affect them at all. For some reason, there are places that teams go. Like when Tech goes to Heinz Field, or whatever they're calling it now, I'm going to continue to call it Heinz Field, they seem to have trouble up there. There's something about that venue and that game, and Pitt's never been this overwhelming team every time they've gone up there, and yet it has given them trouble all the time. This is one I'm saying, just people are going to laugh at it and be like, oh, you're crazy. They walloped Syracuse last year. I'm like, okay, take that attitude into it and see how it turns out.
That's exactly why it's a trap game. I think fans of a certain age understand that it's a trap game. Most of these, all these kids playing in it, they were in middle school the last time Tech played there. And they weren't even alive the previous time Tech played there. So it's a major trap game. And I'm sure you can emphasize that point all you want to, but as Will said a few weeks ago, he was like, "Yeah, if you want to win 9 games this year, remember you're playing at Syracuse. That's an automatic loss. That means if you want to win 9, you've got to win 9 of the other 11."
I don't think it's an automatic loss. I'm just saying beware.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's automatic. I'm just saying
people
that,
listening are gonna be like, "Man, Gio has brainwashed you guys into thinking this place is just the Thunderdome up there," but.
I can't wait for the game.
It's just not an easy place to play.
No.
It's unique. It's in a dome. Nobody else in the ACC is in a dome. It's on AstroTurf.
People don't understand how loud you have now it used to be cloth. Now it is a metal roof in a concrete building. Even if it's half full, it still gets loud as heck.
And even though it's a dome, it's like an intimate dome. It's not one of these just cavernous places.
It is for basketball, but not football.
Right. And it's I guess this game is in November, so it won't matter as much. But it's in the past, it was not air conditioned. So
when it was the Carrier Dome,
when it was the Carrier Dome, it was not air conditioned. So players would always have cramping issues and stuff. It's like, could you get your sponsor as an air conditioning company? Could you just get some AC in this place? Come on.
Yeah. I've been to some very, very toasty games in the Dome.
I hate that building. I hate it. At one point,
I have it tattooed on my arm.
Well, that's your problem.
Building.
Listen, I've never been there, but I hate it. One day, Syracuse will build a new stadium, and I would like to volunteer to push the button when they demolish that one.
I like going in there. It reminds me of the Metrodome in my youth because you walk around the concourses man, this has a very early 80s vibe to this thing. I don't know what it's like now that they've redone it, but
it is very, very different now, and I will say they've modernized it so much so that it's one of the most modern looking spots in the ACC. It's pretty cool looking, so I look forward to you guys seeing it.
I hope everybody's enjoyed the Syracuse pod that we're doing right now.
Everyone's gonna, I will add this just to further make everybody upset. You guys are sleeping on just Syracuse is going to have the most talent they've had probably since they played against Michael Vick. They've added a handful of the new recruiting staff has been unbelievable. Handful of 4 stars. The transfer portal gets that they've gotten. It's not just Kyle McCord. They got 2 wide receivers from Georgia, a defensive end from Texas A&M.
Now you're drinking the Kool-Aid.
I'm drinking the Kool-Aid.
This team won 10 games a few years ago. That was a talented team.
Yeah.
No doubt.
You can't win 10 games without talent. And I see it time and time again where teams like Syracuse, they hire a recruiter and then they recruit well. And then as it turns out, they can't coach because there's like no evidence.
Then it flops.
Exactly.
We'll see. We'll see how this
So you're young and enthusiastic. You drink your Kool-Aid, but by the time you're our age, you've seen it all and you've figured out that, probably not going to work.
It's like a Tim Brewster type or something like that.
Yeah.
That's a fair fear when you hire a defensive backs coach as a head coach, no doubt. Well, after that, November 9th, this is probably the marquee game on the schedule for many. Clemson, inside Lane Stadium. Boy, it would be fun if that thing ends up being at night regardless. Even though the Tigers haven't necessarily been what we're so used to seeing them be, doesn't mean they won't next year, first and foremost. And second of all, it's always big when a team like that comes into Lane.
Well, with the uncertainty at Florida State and all the turnover on the roster there, it wouldn't surprise me if Clemson's the pick to win the conference. I don't necessarily know if that's earned based on how the offense played last year, but it's usually a strong defensive team. I think people look at the pedigree of somebody like Klubnik at quarterback, even though he hasn't played great. I think the potential is there. It wouldn't shock me if they were the pick. There's a lot of roster movement that's still going to take place before we get to the 4-day ACC kickoff. Is that what they said it's going to be this summer?
Ridiculous.
And make picks at that point. But Clemson will be in the mix. They're certainly going to be up there.
Chris, what do you think about the Tigers?
I think that's certainly going to be the biggest home game of the Pry era so far. I wish it wasn't after the Syracuse game. Again, because if Virginia Tech goes up there and drops that game, it's going to dampen the atmosphere of the Clemson game. So hopefully Virginia Tech can go up there and get their first win in the Carrier Dome, or their second win this century, basically. And
maybe the name change will help.
Maybe. I think the Clemson game, on paper, you look at it before the season, before the schedule is released, and you're like, that's the date you have circled. And it is to a certain extent, but since the game's in November, it has the potential to be a big game, but it also has the potential to not be as important depending on what both teams do before that. So if Virginia Tech loses that Syracuse game, that trap game, then all of a sudden you're like, I'm just not as excited about the Clemson game anymore, because it looked like, now we're just playing the hopefully the Hokies don't get their third ACC loss or something like that. Ideally, that Clemson game would be for a spot in the ACC title game. That's what everyone's hoping. But by itself in a vacuum, it's a big game. Exactly how big it is going to depend on the Syracuse game the week before.
I know they don't play every year because of the old scheduling format, but it's sort of remarkable to me that Virginia Tech has not beaten Clemson, and it's been 17 years. 2007.
Yep.
Going to go all the way back to that. So that's 6 straight losses. Some have not been close. There was that 2016 ACC championship game where I thought Tech had them.
Yeah.
At the end, they're driving down the field. They're like the 20-something yard line. Down by touchdown if they score. Justin Fuente had said afterwards they were going to go for 2 against a team that eventually won the national championship. That was such a great game, like an underrated great game. I feel like people are just like, oh, Clemson cruised in that game. It's like, that was close. That was a game that was very much at risk down the end there. It'd be great to see a competitive game like that, because it just has not been competitive between these teams the last couple times they played.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, you go and on the 16th, you have an open game again. Then you end out the season November 23rd on the road at Duke, followed by November 30th, home game against Virginia. Kind of crazy that it's going to be the first time in quite some time that UVA plays inside Lane Stadium after everything that took place. First time in my time as a student that those two will play inside Lane Stadium, which is pretty cool.
With fans.
Yes.
I mean, the 2020 game took place, but there were 250 people in the crowd because of all the COVID restrictions. I mean, it's been 6 years since Virginia Tech fans have been able to, enjoy a UVA game at home.
I remember Katie Adams, who used to host our podcast, she said her senior class at Virginia Tech, and Nick's as well, never got to see Virginia Tech host UVA, which is hard to believe. Yeah. So, looking forward to that one, and not one that, again, like you don't really look to see to like circle that game because you know when it's going to be every year, but it's also sort of like they're so bad that like I hadn't even given that game any thought. Like, I don't even know what they've done in the transfer portal or who's going to be on the team.
They've added some guys. Chris Tyree was
Tyree.
one. A couple other.
Yeah.
They got that quarterback from somewhere. I can't remember. I would expect them to be better than what they were this year. I think this year was sort of a bottoming out type thing. But you look at the end of that schedule, Duke and Virginia. That's how you want to finish the season. I know Duke has been pretty good lately. Loses coach to Texas A&M.
And all of their players.
Yeah, Manny Diaz coming in, and then on top of that, a bunch of transfers. One coming here. Aeneas Peebles playing against his former team, and they lose Riley Leonard. And we saw what they were last year without Riley Leonard versus what they were with him. Completely different team. So, if you can navigate the early part of the schedule, the middle part of the schedule, once you get to ACC play, and can put yourself in position in striking distance for possibly getting in that ACC title game, to finish it up with Duke and Virginia, I think is a pretty good way to finish the schedule because you're giving yourself a chance.
Anytime you grab a road game at Duke, I almost feel like it's, you definitely don't want to call it a gimme, but the fact that is not a hostile place to play by any means could be, especially if Tech's very, very good at that point, which we are hoping and expecting that is the case. 65 to 85% Tech fans. I mean, that could be like a little bit of a home game for the Hokies there in Durham.
The last Tech Duke game I went to was 2018. The last road Tech Duke game I went to was 2018. And, at least half of that crowd was Virginia Tech. And that was when Duke had a pretty good team.
And that Duke was ranked in that team.
That's right. They were. And they had a first-round pick at
Tech
quarterback.
was coming off the ODU loss.
That's right.
So they were big underdogs in that game. And then they actually... they bowed up and won that game on the road,
Ryan Willis.
Then came the 4-game losing streak after that, where the wheels kind of fell off with that program. But that one, 2020 game, I remember that being just like an empty stadium because Duke didn't allow anybody in that game. You could hear everything they were saying from the sideline up in the press box in that game. Khalil Herbert with a huge effort. And then what was the last one? 2022. They were not very competitive down there.
It was empty.
It was 7-0 after the first drive.
Yeah,
that was it.
But with Duke on the schedule in the opposite, you usually kind of have that with UVA at the end of the year, where I know it's a rivalry game, but it does feel like a very welcoming road environment when you go up to UVA when you're Virginia Tech. I think Duke can be the same way this year.
I want to ask you guys, Nick and I were talking about this on the way in the car this morning. You look at that Clemson game, and you have to hope at that point, in all likelihood, Clemson's like a one-loss team, maybe undefeated at that point. We don't really know what the Tigers are going to look like, but
they open with Georgia, so
they do play.
So they're not going to be undefeated.
So they're going to be a one-loss team.
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there's a high chance because Georgia's pretty good. So.
Yeah, Georgia's pretty darn good. But the Hokies, I mean, you look at that point in the schedule. You guys are saying Syracuse is going to be tough. I understand that. You might fumble one like Miami, Stanford, especially because you play them after. I think they're going to get up for that Rutgers game. I think
for sure.
It's
That's going to be a home game,
revenge game, but I could totally see them messing it up at Miami.
I think they'll beat Rutgers. I just think those next two games, just because of the nature of them, that a short week after probably the second or third most physical team on the schedule,
right,
and a long flight to boot, that's asking a lot. And then the next week you're all the way on the West Coast. So yeah, I mean, I'll be happy with a 1-1 record after those two games, after the Miami game, after the Stanford game. So if you can start 5-1, I think that's very good. And then you've got those 2 winnable games at home after that. Who was at Boston College and Georgia Tech. So you could start 7-1.
BC on a Thursday night.
Yeah, nothing bad ever.
Hope it doesn't rain in that game.
Yeah,
I put that out there, and fans are like, "Don't you dare mention that game!" Like it's Voldemort or something like that. Like you can't mention the name of it. So everybody knows the history of that. I mean, that was the last time they played on a Thursday night against BC. Was that Matt Ryan game in the rain, which is, you ask anybody, that's maybe the worst loss in program history or up there.
I know a Thursday and a Friday are not the same thing, but you played him on a Friday, and Brent Pry's first year took care of business handedly. 1 of 3 wins on the season. So,
Yeah, I don't think I like their quarterback. He's a dynamic dude, but they don't have as much talent on that team now as they. That team was a lot Matt Ryan, but they had some other good players on that team too. I mean, BJ Raji.
Yeah, he was pretty good.
Yeah.
I'm sure there were some offensive linemen in that group. And then Tech did get revenge in the ACC title game. We should mention that.
Yep.
People are like, nobody ever mentions that. It's like, okay, well.
2 years in a row.
The Thursday night loss sort of derailed the possibilities of that season.
Obviously, back-to-back ACC title games in Florida featuring Boston College. It was exactly what the ACC dreamed of when it expanded.
And maybe put them in the situation that they were TV contract-wise for a while.
Yeah.
Like Florida State wants to complain, the TV contract's so bad. It's like, maybe if you played a little bit better when the TV contracts were being signed, things would have been different.
So everyone's going to ask the question, do we have a possibility of a college game day type of hype when Virginia Tech, we're looking at 1, maybe 2 losses heading into that Clemson game. And Clemson, who knows what they do.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. Like I said, I think you don't have a chance at game day if you lose the previous week. I don't on the road.
That's 100% true.
Right.
Yes.
So that Syracuse game for me is maybe the most important game of the season because it decides the importance of the Clemson game.
Yeah.
right. Which is kind of an odd sentence to say. But yeah, I think Tech, they've got a chance to have a good season. It's a manageable schedule. I dislike 2 parts of it. But again, like when you have a 16-team league and you're going to have to travel to the West Coast, there's no way you could make everybody happy with a 16-team league. There's no way schedules can be balanced. There's no way you can avoid one, a bad 2 or 3 game stretch. I mean, there's going to be certain years. Last year, I thought Tech had a very favorable schedule, but that was with a 14-team ACC. I expect in the future, there's going to be years where you really like it, and there's going to be other years where you feel like, oh, God, who in the ACC office hates Virginia Tech, right? But it's going to be some years like that, but every other team is going to have some years like that too, just with the nature of the size of these conferences these days and the coast-to-coast, geographic makeup of the leagues. There's no way you can avoid it.
Yeah, there's not a good time to fly cross-country to play a game unless there's a bye week or an open week on one or other side of it. Yeah, it's just a tough time. You say college game day possibility, that Clemson game, and I instantly go and look up the SEC schedule and the Big Ten schedule at that point. Alabama LSU is on November 9th. So
college game day will not be coming to Blacksburg.
Florida Texas, I don't know if Florida will be any good. In the Big Ten, Washington Penn State. Kind of an interesting one.
No Kalen.
Speaking of West Coast games.
Conference game, Washington versus Penn State.
You sure that's not the Rose Bowl?
No. I will say it's rather easy to look up. Are there going to be big games that weekend? You just have to look up 2 conferences, basically.
That's true.
Other than the ACC, because I don't think the Big 12 is going to be doing it. So, Alabama LSU, that might be a tough one.
Depends how good Bama is at that point.
I think they'll be all right.
And I love nothing
I don't
more
think they're
than
going to be the sisters of the poor all of a sudden because Nick Saban left. I think there's quite a bit of talent still. Oh, they have to get by with like 70% 5 stars on their roster instead of 90% or whatever it was before. So they'll be okay.
Yeah. Well, I like watching Brian Kelly lose games, so hopefully LSU's not that good without Jaden Daniels, but we'll see what happens.
The other part of it is maybe one of those schools gets a game day trip before that.
True.
And they don't like to make repeat trips to some places. We'll see. We'll see how the season shakes out.
Yeah, those teams are going to play multiple big games.
Or maybe that's the week they choose to go like North Dakota State or something like that for some random FCS game that they like to do.
Or because you could look at it, the ACC's kind of weak. They're still going to do an ACC game or 2 at some point, and they're like, there's your top two teams in the ACC. Like, even though there might be a bigger game, we're going to go to that one because that's the biggest game in the ACC all season.
It could be. Do Clemson and Florida State play?
They play earlier in the season.
Right. So it's a lot of factors involved. I would say at this point that it's a candidate. But to get there, you have to beat Syracuse.
And everybody else before
and
that,
some other, teams.
Yeah.
It's not just beat Syracuse and you're
and
4
you
and 5.
Right.
You're not getting college game.
Well, let's assume the rest of the season goes as planned, and you're like 7-1 going into the Syracuse game or something like that. You need to win that Syracuse game.
One other game of note that week, also involving an ACC team, Florida State and Notre Dame.
Ugh.
So that's one that looks like that is is that at Notre Dame too?
They have Riley Leonard now, right? Is that?
That's
Yeah,
right.
I didn't have a terrible nightmare. That's
He's
real.
just poaching private ACC schools of their star quarterbacks.
Yes, literally.
Yeah.
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 That's
the
crazy.
food chain. That's the college football food
right.
chain. That's just how it works.
Well, it's literally impossible to project where College Game Day is going to go November 9th. But it was fun to talk about. Anyways, guys, I got to get to class. I'll ask you just final thoughts on this schedule before we turn everyone loose for the week.
I'm looking forward to it. I know it seems like I probably did more complaining than I did, but like you write a column every year about the schedule, you can find a couple things to nitpick, and I found my 2 things. But overall, it's a manageable schedule. I think Tech has a good chance to start 4-0. I think they've got a nice little, I call it break, but I think two very, very winnable games in Lane in the middle of the season, and then 2 games at the end of the season that they should win. So I think if you start 4-0, then win the 2 in the middle that you should win where you'll be favored, and then you win the 2 at the end where you'll be favored, that's 8 wins right there. I think it sets up to be a good year for Virginia Tech as long as the key players stay healthy and things like that.
That's big, yeah.
Yeah, looking forward to the season.
I think it's a good schedule for where this team's at right now. Where, coming off a 6-6 season, can you take the next step and sort of get in the conversation of being a ACC contender? I think they should run through the non-conference schedule. This is a good year to do that. You don't have this, marquee game like at Ohio State or something like that. That's like, that could be a pretty tough one. You look at the conference schedule. They don't play Florida State. They don't play Louisville. They don't play NC State. Those are the 3 teams that finished, 3 of the 4 teams that finished ranked and we're at the top of the ACC standings this year. I look at this and I go, this schedule kind of feels like what Louisville was last year, where Louisville didn't have Florida State, didn't have Clemson during the regular season. I don't think played North Carolina as well. You miss those top teams, you give yourself a chance to sort of be a dark horse in this whole thing. And I think there's a little bit of buzz about Virginia Tech nationally.
There is,
even
yes.
some teams, some national writers being like, watch out for this team a little bit. So I think the schedule plays into that because it's a favorable schedule in that sense.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. We're sorry, not sorry for all of the Syracuse talk today. It all starts in Nashville, and we'll talk plenty of football leading up to that day. For Chris Coleman, for Andy Bitter, for Nick Brown, I'm Giovanni Heater saying so long from Blacksburg. We'll see you on Monday.